Okay, so the next question is for all our panelists. So, what, according to you, are the challenges that you see in your respective fields in the foreseeable future? And regarding that, what advice would you give to our listeners who wish to pursue post graduation or their future studies in your particular fields? So, Professor Nagasinkar, would you like to begin?
Yes, and I'm going to be very brief about this. But if I look at what areas people might challenges in the sense which areas they might have to work upon, which areas are going to be thrust areas, I feel in pharmaceutics and drug delivery system, targeting systems are going to be mainstay, mainly because you have to have some platform technologies possibly for uh, delivery of molecules to specific targets. And then you may have small molecules and you may have large molecules, making it more complicated. And since the systems are getting more and more complex and the agents are also getting more and more complex, then maybe uh, some areas like challenges that you should find simplified methods for fabrication of complex systems, and maybe more personalized medication would be required. And I see a lot of work being done in the area of 3D printing, um, with the approach that it gives personalized medication, pills, or a specific dosage, which is possible by 3D printing, which may not be possible by conventional methods. And I see that a lot of research in this area is moving towards molecular level. Earlier, what work we were doing with small molecules and the in vitro characterization and maybe the in vivo characterization also, now we are moving on to uh, tracking different pathways for diseases and disorders and looking at estimating levels of the markers for those diseases or disorders. And because there is a restriction on in vivo research, I mean, in vivo evaluation, animal evaluation, so we are moving towards cell line work. So these are all challenges that I feel in the coming years the students have to accept, and delivery systems to deliver more demanding agents, maybe antiviral agents in today's scenario of pandemic, treatment of viral diseases. And we have seen that everything like research, right from hand sanitizer, masks up to mRNA vaccines, that was the versatility uh, in demand. Uh, that would be seen, I think, in coming years in pharmaceutics, specifically the drug delivery system area. I see that students who want to enter into pharmaceutics or drug delivery system, I feel the foundation of physical pharmacy has to be very, very strong. Because I feel that students, even in their masters, in their theory classes, they just somehow try to by heart the information that is available to them. But to go into the depth and trying to understand uh, and then to apply it in their research, they need a very, very strong uh, foundation of physical pharmacy. I feel today also, these days, means when I'm discussing in classes, if I come to deriving those equations, usually in physical classes also, there used to be some silence in the beginning because there's a great block, a psychological block against mathematics for pharmacy students. But I feel that it gives you basic understanding when you go into the derivations. You try to understand the system very well in depth, and then you are able to apply it to more modifications, to more innovation, and likewise. Whether it is in pharmaceutics or in any area, I feel uh, for PhD particularly, that means to do really research in depth, one must have curious mind and lot of enthusiasm coupled with scientific approach, knowledge of scientific methods, and should be able to come up with a hypothesis for the problem and questions which you want to answer. That should be clear to the person. Then only you can really go into depth. Or to go into depth, you must have those questions in mind, that these are the questions I want to answer, and I would try to do experiments to see that my questions get answered very well. It is just like when we try to decorate liposomes with some ligands, and then we want to know whether these ligands are going to work to take the liposome to a target. We have to do something to see what is going to be the method to know that when I make some changes in ligands or when I make changes in my system, these methods will tell me that it is really going to the target and it is going to go inside the cell and it will do the work that it is supposed to do. So such hypotheses and questions have to be the clear part. I think one has to be passionate not only about just experimental work, but about extensive reading of literature, which gives you a good background. It is helpful in doing your own work. It is also helpful when it comes to writing manuscripts related to your work. And for everything, I think above all is what is required: honesty, integrity, and ethics. There's no substitute to hard work. And I think there is no substitute to passion. These are my thoughts.
Professor Coutinho and Professor Malamene ma'am, do you want to add your thoughts too?
Uh, uh, I will add, Dr. Nagarsenkar has already put in all the points, right? I would add one or two things more. One is a lot of patience is required while doing research. I mean, you have to have a protocol or a design of your studies, and you have to execute it systematically. Now, at each step, you might expect certain results, but often you may not get the desired results. There could be something else that you get. Your first experiment is never going to be successful. So you would have to then think about, reflect about what went wrong and try to modify the conditions, because quite often, this is what we see. Students feel something is reported in literature and we try that out, but quite often it may not work in the lab that they are working. There might be some gaps. Then we try to substitute some reagents, modify the method, and then you should not be disappointed. You may fail 3 times, but still you should go back to literature. Literature search is not only in the beginning of the work. You have to continuously be reading up, try to find out what went wrong and why it went wrong. uh, then you should always document whatever you have done. Daily, there should be a diary or a notebook, or what you have, a journal. Every day you have to write down with proper date what experiments you have performed. Even it may be just preparing some reagents, but you have to write it down, right? Record it systematically. Uh, Today, there is a tendency for students to, they'll record everything on the PC, right? All their data is, now if you're doing, of course, computer CAD, computer aided drug design, etc. Okay, it will be in the computer itself. But otherwise, you have to write down, jot down the points, and because then you can read it back. Say if your experiment is a failure, you can read it again and find out where it went wrong. Another point is, it's also important from the point of view of patents, right? Maintaining a proper notebook with date and even maybe time. Uh, Now, if there are many people working simultaneously in the same area and you have applied for a patent, it is always they will look at your lab notebooks, right? Who did that experiment first and got that result, right? Or developed that. So that is one thing which students often miss out. Students come with their laptop and they'll show you this graph, that graph, the tables, but these should all be hard copies. You have to actually note down in a notebook and then transfer it to or maybe take printouts or screenshots and put them in your, stick them in your notebook. This is very important today, although, I mean, we are talking of computers and all the advanced systems. Uh, at the ground level in the lab, this is very important. Uh, Patience and perseverance is very important. Uh, and uh, as I said, a lot of data is generated, and how to get that, how to conclude, making effective conclusions. If you record it, that is going to help. If you write down systematically each point. I would add to that. Second is, I think today there is a dearth of resources. I mean, everything has become very expensive. Say the chemicals are expensive, the uh, say cell line studies are expensive, animal studies are expensive. So you need to be conserve all the resources and ensure that you plan your work effectively. You all have to budget everything. You know, how much would be the cost at each step, especially in your PhD. I think cost of research is very high, and we always require support from government agencies or the industry. So project writing, how do you write a proposal? So students should be ready to write a proposal. You have to learn how to write a proposal. How would you project the costs? What would be the steps? Uh, Another important point which comes to my mind is data integrity. Okay, that is a very alarming thing. I think I do not know if you students have come across the data integrity issues. A lot of our uh, Indian companies are getting issues of data integrity from US FDA. So this is something as students, right from student level, you have to ensure that your data is you are ethical, as Dr. Nagarsenkar said. So right from your student days, you establish and you develop data integrity. So it is very important aspect of research, the integrity. I guess,
Absolutely, ma'am.
yes, yeah. So I
Thank
think
you.
these are the points that come to my mind.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you,
Yeah.
Professor Nagasenkar and Professor Menon, ma'am. Kutino sir, would you like to add something, or should I move on to the next
Uh,
question?
yeah, I think Dr. Nagasekar and Dr. Mala Menon has expressed their views very well and uh, covered this area very nicely. I do not have anything more to add.
Okay, Professor. So thank you for your advice. I'm sure the audience will benefit from this. So my next question is for Professor Nagasenkar. In the recent COVID times, people, especially in India, where pharma industry is a little underrated profession, we have realized the significance of one of the very important domains of pharmacy research and development. So can we initiate a discussion about the same? So
That's a
basically I
very good
wanted to.
question.
Yes, ma'am. So I basically wanted to ask whether the qualitative and quantitative aspect of research in the country. So according to a latest US report created with statistics compiled by the US National Foundation, India has emerged as the world's third largest publisher of science and engineering articles, which is actually a great news. But we also have another government report which revealed that only 15.8% of the total publications produced by Indian researchers feature in the top 10 journals globally. So, this report further emphasizes that the dire need to focus on the quality of research in the country. So, what do you have to say about the qualitative and quantitative aspect of research in the country?
Well, the first part of your question was something related to pharmacy research in general. And I feel that I do not know whether you said that it became a bit secondary earlier or whatever. But I feel that, yes, a lot of times I have felt earlier also that science or scientific work, particularly in pharmacy, the drug discovery, drug delivery systems have not been given that much attention, or they were kind of taken for granted, and all the time the focus for some valid reasons has been to reduce cost and to see that it is available to the large population, but not really realizing the extent to which the scientists have been working behind the curtain to get the drug out in the market for the benefit of society, or the delivery systems being available for delivery of drug. And suddenly I feel at the time of COVID, it came to realization that no, now we want vaccines, now we want the treatment to these disorders, and it has kind of taken center stage. And of course, as a result of that, we have some things repurposed, some more importance given to production of API, uh, that is active pharmaceutical ingredients, which were almost majority were being procured or purchased from elsewhere in Asia, or it's like drugs or vaccines getting approved on emergency basis, and a lot of realization that a whole lot of work goes into it, which is actually a good part of COVID situation. And the second part that you asked was about, yes, about some reports saying that India ranks very high in numbers in the publications, which is very nice to know, great to know. But the second part which you said is UGC report saying that, or government report saying that it is not reflected in the quality, and not so high percentage of those publications are in high ranking journals, which is a disappointment. Uh, but I would say that, yes, this is realization, and it is acknowledgement that it has happened. So that is the first step towards improvement. And maybe we need to dwell upon why this has happened. Now, if I think grossly, is it because of some mandatory condition that, say, for a degree of PhD, student must publish 2 papers, or for appraisals, promotions of maybe faculty or researchers, some publications are absolutely essential. And because of such compulsion, sometimes it happens that people, some people tend to publish in substandard journals. So it's sometimes compulsion versus real initiative of the person to do good work, and to do high quality work. Uh, and I think when the numbers are required and there is no yardstick to quality, such things can happen. Okay, but this is a grossly looking at the situation. But if you look more carefully, maybe you can have some solutions to it, even if there are mandatory numbers. Some yardstick of quality can be added, that publication should be in good impact factor journals. And in impact factors also, there are various type of impact factors. So which are the standard ones, agencies giving that impact factor, that should be considered. But there are 2 aspects I feel to what you are asking. One is not being able to do high quality work, and the second is not being able to publish in uh, higher level journals. Means you may have good quality work, but not being able to publish. Maybe sometimes these publications are also expensive. You need to pay for it, and you may not have funds. Or sometimes the manuscript writing is also an art and you need assistance. But the second part can be a lot corrected with assistance. But the first is to do high quality work. The limitations could be maybe because of lack of funds, and everybody knows that research and innovation investment in our country may be on lower side as compared to many other countries. When you go to publish in high ranking journals, your ranking of institution also comes into picture in some way. And I think that current science technology policy lists many measures for upliftment of the quality, and which are very good points. And one of them I feel is collaboration, which if it is complementary and it is done very wisely. That means all the collaborating partners are very willing to contribute to that particular project. I think it can really add value to the dimensions of your work, to depth of the work. And I have myself personally experienced this, that my collaborations within institute with my colleagues, outside the institute, in national laboratories, or in international universities, all have benefited in the way, to my understanding, to the work which was put in. For example, now when we did work um, with a German university, FS University of Vienna in Germany, we found that we were developing a system and they had a platform to evaluate that system in human skin, which is normal human skin, which they used to collect from plastic surgeon. And they had a very standardized method which they had developed, wherein our systems also could be evaluated in addition to their system. And that was an exchange program. So my student could go there, he could work, he could get the experience. So as a result, the student, teacher, their students or researchers, everybody was benefited. Ultimately, we came up with a very good publication. I feel it was all enriching experience. So I think that we keep on trying and really trying in good direction, we would be able to move up into the quality as well.
You brought up about
that is from me.
Yes, you brought up some significant factors which come into play when it comes to publishing and journals and all that. And thank you for the insightful answer. Yeah, the next question is to Professor Coutinho. Recently, I read an article titled as Sci-Hub Case, the court should protect science from greedy academic publishers. A report also states that a cumulative number of downloads from this database exceeded 1 billion, with an average number of downloads per day being 3 to 6 lakhs. How do you think Sci-Hub and other platforms like it have impacted the researchers?
So there are two ways you can look at this issue. Okay, so if you look at Sci-Hub's philosophy about why was it started, its goals, it's nice to see what they state as their prime goal. They are not making any profit from their services. They basically state that they are trying to help the underprivileged people in gaining access to knowledge, which they feel should be freely available without any cost. And therefore, to people who cannot afford it, to students who cannot afford it, they are actually offering this service. Now, that may sound very noble and very nice to many of us, especially to a large population that are there in the countries which are economically not well off. I think this resource is actually being used to a very large extent by the economically not well off countries, by students and also researchers in this economically not well off countries. Okay, but while it seems to be a very nice idea to provide this service free of cost, because those who cannot afford will be able to have access to information and to knowledge, one must remember that also this is being taken from sources and from places where this information is costing people in order to host, to collate, and to manage this information and these sources out there. So for example, if you look at some of the big publishing houses like Elsevier, Pergamon Press, ACS, okay, all of these houses, to publish a journal, to maintain it, to make it accessible to readers, cost money, okay? To put a paper into print to have a physical, this is also a very costly process. The cost may be not very large if you are offering it as an online service, where you put it on some cloud or on some web server where people can download and access. The cost must not be very high as much as when you're trying to produce a physical copy of that. But all said and done, there is a cost factor that is involved. And so we must remember that when Sci-Hub is trying its best to provide these resources free of cost, it is pinching these publishing houses, okay? Because basically they survive and they live on the money that they get from selling this information out here. So we must not forget that also, that I cannot expect everything to be free and not pay something for what I'm using. There is nothing like free in this world, all said and done. Though a lot of people tout free, that's a big misnomer. There is nothing that is actually free in this world. Somebody is paying a cost. If somebody has to give me something free, whatever free, okay, let's say somebody is providing me a free meal, it has cost him to buy that vegetable, that cereals, that rice, it has cost him to cook it, to use electricity or gas to cook it. Yes, there is a cost for him. So while he has provided something for me, it doesn't come free for him. He doesn't get his rice and his wheat and his vegetables or his gas or his electricity free. He has to pay for it. So there is in fact nothing that is really free in this world, though it is many times touted as being free out here. So while Sci-Hub has been a great boon to many of the underprivileged students and teachers out here, I think we must look at it in a very fair sense, and that it cannot go on forever. It's not like I can always rob the rich in order to feed the poor. That cannot last forever. At some time or the other, if I'm going to extract from the poor, from the rich to feed the poor, the rich are also going to get depleted of their resources, and this will come to an end sometime or the other. So we should understand somewhere that there should be a judicious mix of what can be given to the poorer nations, to the poorer people, and what can the richer countries or the richer people actually be able to give from their riches in order to cater to the needs of the poorer sections out here. Okay, so now I know that there is a court case in the High Court where actually some of the big publishing houses have asked to shut down these resources, especially in India. And I think I do not know what is the status of that court case in the Supreme Court. I think it is in the Supreme Court. I do not know what will be the final judgment about it. Let's hope there is some wise decision taken about this. But I must say these things that out of saying that information cannot be free forever. There will be a cost that we must have to pay. And the question is, what cost will I have to pay? So I think that the well-off countries should now have a dual pricing systems. And I've always been saying this, okay? We know that this is not only true about information, about articles from journals being used freely through Sci-Hub, but it's also true in actually computer operating systems. I know a large percentage of people in the poorer countries actually download a pirated version of Windows and use it on their laptops just because they cannot afford it. The price today of a Windows 10 is something like about 10,000. And how many of us in India today can afford to buy a computer and then install a 10,000 operating system on it? And therefore they feel that they should now use a pirated version of of all that. And not only for the operating system, but for many other apps are also being downloaded. Pirated versions are being downloaded and being used. Microsoft Office and the plethora of these apps which are being downloaded from sites, this pirated sites which are being used. So my only contention in this is that the richer countries or the people who can afford should have a dual pricing systems. Those who can afford it and can pay for it should be charged the full cost, okay, or maybe a little extra. And those who cannot really afford it should be asked to pay, okay, because only then when we pay, we'll actually realize the full value of the things that I realized that when I get something free, I really never appreciate that article or that thing. I never really begin to appreciate its full value. But if I pay even a small fraction for it, I actually begin to appreciate and treasure it much more. So I think this dual pricing should be done, that the poorer countries and the poorer people should be made to pay, but should be paid to pay according to their standard and to their cost and to the cost and to the way that they can afford these resources. So even my final taking that Sci-Hub has served many of us very well. I don't see its fate lasting very long. Sometime or the other, eventually it may have to die out and vanish. And in that event, I think the many publishing houses should come forward with some mechanism in order to provide such resources to the poorer and to the developed people. I know that there are a lot of philanthropists who can actually take this initiative. There are many people with rich pockets who can actually take this initiative and do something in this area, okay, that information should be available to everybody, irrespective of their age, their gender, and their financial resources. Information should be available, definitely not free, but at a cost that everybody can afford. Okay, while we see the Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda, that Gates Foundation is doing a lot today in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine, and then also in propagating research, the pharma research. I think somebody should talk to them and ask them about expanding their scope into providing information to the underprivileged countries at a very nominal cost, or at a giveaway price which they can actually pay to the publishing houses, so that they can recover some fraction of their cost of what it entails them in order to maintain and run their resources out there. So this is my take on it. So I do not know if everybody agrees. I do not know how well it will go down. Many people may not agree and would love Sci-Hub to continue forever, but I don't see that this can go on for a very long time. And I feel that some philanthropist or one of these publishing houses should look at some dual pricing policy where it becomes affordable to everybody, whatever is their resources, whatever is their income, whatever is the financial constraint, that they should have access to this information out there. Yeah.
Absolutely well said, Professor Coutinho. Your perspective really is perfect here on a very critical aspect of research and development, and we really anticipate a judicial solution to this problem. And even our STIP, the policy, is working on one payment, one subscription policy. So let's see how it goes. Yeah. So the next question is to Professor Mala Menon. According to a recent study, there has been an 85% increase in number of students going and settling abroad from 2003. In just over a decade, India has lost nearly 9.5 lakh individuals to brain drain to the United States alone. What are your thoughts, Professor Mala, on what we call as brain drain? And we would also like to know the thoughts of other panelists as well.
Yeah, this brain drain is this is not a recent phenomenon. I think it has existed since very long time, right from 1960s and 70s, we know of so many people, right, who have gone and later on they settle there, they go for higher education. And this is in fact happening from, the students from prime institutes like IITs, right? Uh, Same thing is happening in pharmacy. We have a lot of students who have moved abroad and then they make it very big there. They do very well there. Even in BCP, we have a lot of alumni who have settled abroad for doing well. I think this is, uh, it is again, there are two-sided, because one is, of course, we cannot prevent students from going and enhancing their knowledge. They are going to places where there are better resources, better facilities, and better avenues for research. I mean, if they stay back here, they may not have the same resources, which is already, I mean, we are already saying that the research level or the publications are not up to the mark. uh, Now we have to have, I mean, and not many of them come abroad. I mean, they don't come back. Now, there are many people who have said that when they come back and they've tried to settle down here, try to work, but it's very frustrating because the systems here, or maybe they don't get the same facilities and the system, and then again they go back. I mean, there are n number of cases of people who have come back and tried it out here, thinking that they would uh, uh, enhance our nation's scientific research. Uh, so that is another side. Now, how do we overcome the situation? It's a little tricky. What I mean, from what we've heard, uh, so all these big universities like Harvard, and they always have, they call back their alumni, and once the alumni do it big, they are supposed to contribute to their alumnus. They have to come back to their college, contribute to the students in some way, either in terms of teaching, in terms of some collaboration, or financial resources, right? So that is one way by which we can. And today, of course, with globalization and so many of this encouragement to have international collaborations, as Dr. Nagarsenkar has had a lot of collaborations, or even Dr. Kutino. That is one way by which we can ensure that although they've gone there, they're still contributing to our nation. Uh, this is what my personal, it's a very difficult situation. Uh, uh, Either way we look at it. So we ensure that even if they are there, they still contribute and improve our students. They uh, become a knowledge resource for our students in some way. And today, with so many of these communication avenues, when we can have these online platforms, I think we should encourage online lectures for our students from uh, people abroad, uh, or maybe have some sort of interactions, discussions, uh, and collaboration. So this is the one of the uh, ways in which we can, maybe bridge that gap, or try to minimize whatever are the hassles of this problem. Uh, I think right. This is what I could think of. I do not know whether I mean any other thoughts are there. In,
Yeah,
huh?
I agree with Dr. Menon actually that this has two sides of it, and it is sad when you think about the term brain drain. But I feel everyone has right to choose what they want, and everyone looks for better opportunities and better avenues. And people relocate from villages to cities. I was born in a small interior village in Maharashtra, and my parents relocated in Mumbai. So some people relocate from their motherland to other countries. And like Dr. Menon is saying, there are ways that they can contribute through collaborations, through advice, through discussion, through fund to their or by bringing in projects from wherever they are to their alma mater. And if we have to retain them, actually, means retain the talent back here, then educational system or more, I feel government should put more worth in their talent, the talent which is present here, to cultivate it, to provide more opportunities, or to make it a more satisfying experience so that they remain here. On the other side, I also feel, I do not know whether everybody would agree about this, but I feel that for students or for teachers, it is important that they cultivate within their students that sense of belonging to the country and pride to be in the country, so that the talent also gets retained here. And also there is aspect of what is meaning of success, prosperity, happiness to oneself. It differs from person to person, but surely it has to be something like people centric thoughts to make the talent more comfortable, more satisfied here. Then possibly you can reduce brain drain. That's what I think about it.
Thank you so much, Professor Menon and Professor Nagarsenkar. Any thoughts, Professor Coutinho?
Okay, so I don't think actually we should consider this as a complete loss. We look at it that these people have gone to the US and have established themselves and are doing very, very well in many areas, academically, financially, and in so many areas. Remember that they have also contributed to the financial development of this country. A lot of their monies have been repatriated back into this country in terms of dollars. Okay, they have helped in some way or the other. Many have come back with philanthropic ideas. Many have given back to their institutions from which they graduated. I know that IIT Mumbai has so many buildings which are named after their alumni. Okay, they have poured, all the IITs, many of the alumni have poured a huge amount of money in the development of the IITs in terms of infrastructure, both in terms of buildings and equipment, and also provided financial resources to the poor and the undeveloped students in that, underprivileged students in the IITs in terms of scholarships and fellowships, etc., out there. So it is not fair to look at this as being a total brain drain and that we have lost, but we have also gained in some, in a lot of ways. Okay, so as Dr. Nagarsekar and Dr. Mala Menon have rightly said that, I think there should be a freedom for people to do what they want to do, go where they want to go, what they want to pursue, whatever they want to do. I think that freedom should still be given to everybody in this world. Okay, that we should not stop. Okay, and as Dr. Nagarsekar rightly said, that actually we are all migrants. We all came from small villages to study in Mumbai and established ourselves in this area. So we also have migrated from our homelands, from our places of birth, and come here and settle down in Mumbai. If not we, at least our parents. I definitely know my father migrated in 1960s from Mangalore to this place, and then I managed to grow up here, though I was born in Mangalore out here. So sometime or other we are also migrants out here. So there was also a brain drain. So if we would think that yes, our villages have lost us, and we can say that Mumbai has gained. Likewise, also we can say that India has lost some of its brilliant scientists and brilliant students out there, and US has gained in terms of in many ways. But remember, in some way or the other, all of us have also contributed to the places from where we had left. I know that many times I've gone back to my own hometown and somehow lectured and talked to students at my hometown in Mangalore, at some of the pharmacy colleges and all. So in a sort of way, I've given back to them. Maybe not very extensively out there, but somehow I contributed to my birthplace from where I migrated. And I definitely think that lot of people who have migrated from India and gone to the US or to the more affluent countries are definitely contributing in some way or the other to the development of this country. So let's not look at it as a loss for India, but let's look at the positive side also, that we have also gained from this brain drain.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the wonderful insights that you gave. Really had never thought of brain drain in this way.
So my next question is for all the panelists. So the new STIP, that is the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, it aims to achieve technological self-reliance, and it also aims to position India among the top 3 scientific superpowers in the coming decade. How do you see it happening soon?
Okay, so I'll go first on it. I think there is commendable work being done by the government in trying to propel us into the top 3 advanced countries in this world. Definitely, it will require a lot of efforts. Okay, because if you look at India and you look at any of the advanced countries, as some people have said, that we are actually centuries behind America or Germany or England. Okay, so there is a stupendous amount of work that needs to be done in order to come at par with these advanced countries. Okay, so we need to begin in earnestness, and it is going to take us quite some time in order to get there, to be on par with the US or with Germany or with Japan, with any of the advanced countries. It's going to take us quite some time. Don't expect it to come in some few decades, some in 1 or 2 decades, but it is going to take us considerable amount of time. And that also, we need to have very sustained efforts. Okay, we need to keep at it, whatever we are doing. Most important thing is how much of resources can we devote from our GDP into this type of work. In the advanced countries, quite a big fraction is being devoted into research and development and in education out there. Even among the top pharmaceutical firms, more than 30 to 35% of the profits is actually plowed back into doing research. And that is why they do such commendable and high level research and groundbreaking and path-breaking research, because we see a large fraction of their profits are actually plowed back in doing research out there. So how much can this country afford from its own GDP in order to plow back into education and into research and to changing the systems is I do not know. Maybe we need to talk to the economists and actually see to what fraction. It needs to be substantial. It cannot just be a 2 to 3% or a 5% of the resources being plowed back into education and into science and technology and to research and development. That is too minuscule. It will take us many centuries in order to come at par and level with the advanced countries out there. Okay, so that is one part. Another part is, I think our mentality should change a lot. And I think that is the biggest hurdle. A biggest hurdle is a change in the mentality. And if we can get over that, okay, because I still see, even in the villages, there is a reluctance to send their children to study, to go to school. Even in this century and in this age, in 2021, okay, when we go and look at the villages out there, they are not keen on sending their children to go to school and to learn things out there. Okay, I know it is much better off now than it was in decades back, of course, and many from the villages, many children from the villages are today going to schools and getting some decent sort of primary or secondary education. But what we need to increase is that from a primary or a secondary education, they should come up to college level education. This type of education. I think if we see a greater numbers of the children in the villages starting to get this type of college level education, then we can actually see great strides in many areas in this country. So that is what I was actually trying to say, change the mentality. And I think that is the biggest hurdle. While the government may be able to allocate resources and finance into the development of schools and colleges and providing infrastructure, by the government may be able to devote a greater portion of the GDP into such avenues. I think the greatest hurdle would be to change the mindsets. And who is going to do that? I have no answer to this. How do we penetrate the villages, and how do we change their attitudes towards education and really uh, bring out what really education can do? Without education, what you will be missing, what progress will not be accessible to you. I think this sort of education that needs to be done, I do not know who is going to do it or how can they do it. I do not know if we teachers can actually go at the grassroots levels and go down to the villages and start actually educating the elders about the need to send their students to school, and not stopping after school, but going further and enhancing their education at a college level, and even further at the postgraduate, and even at the and the doctoral level out there. So if you are able to do this, I think maybe some decades down this line, we will really see India as being on par or in contention with some of the top industrialized and developed nations in this world.
Well, to begin with, I would say that policy document is really a nice document, much more detailed as compared to what I had read, the policy of 2013. And the science and technology innovation policy intends to get there to see India positioning in top 3 countries globally in science, technology, and innovation. And I agree with Dr. Coutinho with all the challenges that he sees. I saw that there were some good points that policy was writing about, like policy is also putting some timelines about achieving, say, doubling of full-time equivalent researchers in every 5 years, or giving open science access, then sharing of facilities. And all this will definitely work towards progressing from where we are. But of course, I agree with Dr. Coutinho, how fast or how slow we will be to go to that level of top 3 countries globally. Very difficult to answer, because while we are working, however, together with lot of resources, even if we work, the other countries are also going to work and climb up in the ladder. So the question is very difficult to answer, but I would say, to be on a very optimistic note, that it will be interesting journey. We may reach there very slowly, but it is going to be very interesting, full of challenges. And because there are challenges, and there would be opportunities. And then I would consider that you and me, or all of us, are very fortunate to be in this time when there are challenges and opportunities, and then we can do something for our country to progress further. That is all I can say.
I agree with Dr. Coutinho and Dr. Nagarsekar in what they've said, that at the grassroots level or at the village level, we should be able to ensure and encourage children to go to school, go up to university level. However, there is one small gap which is there. I think if all of these people get higher education and they migrate to cities, again, we would not be developing the villages. So we have to ensure that at the same time, in the villages or in the interior, we develop some infrastructures, some industries, or other avenues whereby the people continue to stay there, at least a majority of them. And in this, I think vocational training and skill development is a big gap, which is not happening. We feel that everybody should go to college, everybody should get higher education, but it may not be economically feasible. A lot of people find it even difficult, as Dr. Coutinho said, to send their, the attitude, besides the attitude, it is because of the economic difficulties possibly, right? Uh, the condition of the schools in interiors also is another issue. So I think we have to look somewhere, in between, we have to look for the solutions. Vocational training is something where, within the village, so we have to try to solve the problems No, they should be motivated to solve problems uh, in their areas, in the villages, at their places, the local problems. And that might not, say for example in agriculture, or maybe local uh, issues in the villages, health problems. We know that in the interior, the health, I mean, we are all pharmacists, so the health issues, the situation in the health clinics, how many doctors are there, how many pharmacists are there in all these interiors. Now that I think is something at the grassroots level, which I do not know. Again, it's as Dr. Coutinho has said, we are there are no answers to this, and probably from there we have to work upwards, and then possibly we will reach. Now this I will just give you an example of. My brother was coming from US, and next to him, there now he was somewhere in this Minnesota, very cold regions. And when he was coming back, a person sitting next to him was a farmer from that region, and he said he's going for a vacation. So my brother was quite surprised. He said it's a cold region, it's sub-zero for almost 6 months of the year. What do you cultivate? So he said he cultivates corn, and how, I mean, the what are his earnings? How much does he earn from all this? And so he is able to go on a vacation to some say European country. I mean, how many of our farmers are able to do this, right? So that is the level of uh, development, or the economic resources that they have, that even a farmer or a simple laborer there can afford something. Their lives are more rich compared to what it is here. So I think somewhere there is a big gap, and that gap has to be narrowed down, and that is where the solution would lie, right? So educating at all levels is important, to whatever levels are required. So this we have to add on this also, then our country will reach uh, to the higher levels.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for your valuable inputs. So this was the last question from our end, but we do have one question each to all our panelists from their own students. So let's see what they want to ask. So when we asked Dr. Vivek Dhawan, Assistant Professor, Department of Pharmaceutics, about his experience with Professor Nagarsenkar, he responded that she has an amazing personality, work ethic, and her conduct and research are exceptional, and that is an inspiration in itself. He also asked,
What would you advise young researchers so they can come up with innovative ideas?
Well, I am first of all thankful to Vivek for all good words that he said. And my advice is, I think it was part of all these answers, but I would repeat again that they have to be hardworking and really to be innovative in their research. First of all, they should be aware of what is work which is being done around. So extensive reading, literature, and a curious mind, that why is it like this? Why is my system not working? What would more I can do? Somebody has done this, but I don't want to do this. Maybe I can do much better than this. Some curious mind, ready to experiment, enthusiasm, passion for work. I think this is what would be required really to bring in some innovation in the work. And of course, I'm saying that there is no substitute to hard work, but there is no substitute to honesty and ethics. In the research that you want to do, always the principle is you don't want to copy what somebody else is doing. You don't want to repeat what was done earlier and say that this is yours. So that honesty, integrity, and ethics is also absolutely essential, as much as the knowledge of science, curiosity, application, and ready to experiment is required. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagasenkar, for your advice, and I'm sure all listeners would benefit from this and would keep this in mind in their future endeavors. So we also asked Miss Isha, who is Professor Mala Menon's PhD student. She said that Professor Mala always advises that instead of attempting fancy things, you should always try to find simple solutions to problems. So since then, her mantra for research has become simplifying the complex. She also would like to ask, what does the next
What does
generation
the
continue,
yeah.
Sakshi?
What does the next generation teaching model look like to you? What should it comprise?
The next generation teaching model is, I mean, I think we still need to teach the basics, right? Now you have to start, for example, in school, you have to start with ABC, right? The alphabets. So in the same way, even in a college education, we need to start from teaching the basics and ground the basics very well. Then you would go for advances. So again, I mean, I'm really thankful to Isha. I think that has been our, all our research projects. We try to look at simple solutions, and I think this we learned the hard way. I think when there was a tech transfer, we realized that what we had proposed, the method was not working, and it always so. In a small scale, what we do should work in a large scale. So fancy things may not work at the industrial level where large batches have to be made. Since then, we have always been looking to simplify things. So in the same way, I guess always uh, you need to have a curious mind and look at everything from basics and try to simplify the uh, entire problem, right? Not make it too complex, because finally it has to be translated, and it should come to some use for the patient or for the uh, society at large. So we need simple solutions, not very complex things, because then that might not be feasible or it might not be expensive. So this is uh, the mantra that actually most of the things in the world are simple. Everything you can break down, and I think logic is the most important thing. Rational thinking. Quite often, people get confused because they're putting too many things, and so I think right at the research level, students should look at things step by step in a logical sequence, and that uh, will give you or lead you to the answer. Uh, when there is a problem, you always go back to basics and you try to break it down into smaller pieces, and then there the solution will come. So reflection is very important, not just doing the work, but you need to reflect on the work that you have done. Can it be made more easier? Can we improve upon it in some way? So thinking, as Dr. Nagar Senkar said, curiosity and uh, the thinking ability is very important uh, in entire education, which is sadly missing. I mean, somewhere uh, there is a gap in this again, and we do not should not be making students or the students should avoid from being uh, a moron or just by hearting things from the exam. So the exam point of view should be kept aside. So learn for understanding the basics, understanding the concepts. That is what I would advise all students. The marks will definitely come. This is
Thank you so much, Professor Menon, for your insights and your advice. So, we also talked to Dr. Elvis Martis, Assistant Professor, Department of Pharmaceutical Chemistry. And he says that Professor Coutinho has always reiterated one thing to all of his students, that being to read, and read as much as they possibly can. He also asks,
How do you make time to read despite your packed schedule, Professor Coutinho? And one another question is, how can we make chemistry more interesting and less daunting?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Elvis. How do you devote some time out of your busy research and teaching and so many other personal things that we have to do at home, how to devote time to read some research papers? I think the only answer is that I must make a conscious effort that I'm going to read one paper in a week or one paper a day. Uh, it all depends upon how tight your schedule is in the day or is in the week. We always say, I think, a complaint that I do not have time. I do not have time for this. If you ask anybody, why did you not do this and all, could not find time. I did not have time to do this. I think that's a very lame excuse. Uh, so I know that you can be very, very busy, but if you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you will make time for him or for her, even though you have been busy. So it's possible. If you love something or you love somebody, out of your busy schedule and your hectic day, you will find some time to have an online chat or to meet at some place or the other and meet together. How is that possible? So the whole clue to this is, am I passionate, as I've been saying, and I really want to do this deep down in my heart? If the answer to this is yes, you will find how to make 25 hours out of 24 hours. You will always find a way. So the answer to all these things is, if you have a passion and you have a desire and you want to improve, you want to know what is going on, what is current, somehow or the other, you will find time out of your busy schedule to do what you like to do out there. And if I'm not passionate and I don't want to do out there, all excuses will float down and I can make all those excuses out there. I know one of the biggest excuses that I always know, that physical exercise does a lot for your mental and your physical health out there. I know that firmly deep in my hand. And I know that I never do this. And I never do that. In spite of knowing deep down in my heart and in my mind that physical exercise actually benefits both my mental health and as well as my physical health out there, I never get along really to spending out time to do that, to exercise or spend some time to do this thing. But if I'm somehow convinced out there, and for example, if I was in a very serious ailment and my doctor told me, for example, if I had severe arthritis and my doctor told me that to get out of this arthritis, you need to walk 4 kilometers, otherwise it's going to be the end of you, I will make some time to walk that 4 or 5 kilometers just because I want to get rid of my arthritis. Now, where does that time come out? Because I'm desperate. And I know that if I don't do this, I'm going to be severely crippled. I'm going to suffer with arthritis, and all my life I'm going to suffer these consequences. I will find time out in my day in order to do that out here. So if I understand the seriousness and if I have a passion out of that, somehow you will make time to read an article, maybe in a day or in 2 days or in a week or in a week out there. Okay, so that is the only clue to it out there. Okay, so another big thing is how to make chemistry more interesting to us students out here. I don't think I can give an answer to that, because in 35 years, I don't think I have managed to do this. Because when I go for the interviews with the MPharms, it's always last on the priority. My own students, I don't see them selecting students as a first priority. So Elvis, 34 years, I don't think I have succeeded in it. So I don't know how to give you a right answer to how to make chemistry more attractive to our students. I don't think I know a right answer to give you out there. But somebody used to say, and I think it is very true, that all the chemistry that is actually useful to our students, especially to our pharmacy students, can actually be written down in a 32-page booklet. In a 32-page booklet, all the important concepts in chemistry that will be useful to a chemistry student as well as to a non-chemistry student can very succinctly be put up into a 32-page booklet. That is all that the students actually need to learn about chemistry. So now, Elvis, I'm going to leave this to you. What would you want to put in a 32-page booklet of all the chemistry that you studied right from your schooling days to your high school days to your undergraduate days to your postgraduate days and to your PhD days? Now you must have understood, okay? Now being a teacher, what do you think are the most important things that are actually standing you well now in your research? Those concepts, those most important concepts. Can you put it down to in a very simple way in a 32-page booklet and tell students, this is what you should be reading constantly, and this is what you should master. I would tell you a few things that I would put into this 32-page booklet. I would put up about structures, about three-dimensional structures, this concept of three-dimensional structures, about hybridization. When we talk about sp3 hybridization, where are those 4 bonds directed in space? If a student can get that concept, that spatial understanding of where are these 4 bonds in space, okay, if you stand, okay, today, where are these 4 bonds in relation to where you stand today? Can you point that out? If you can teach those students exactly where are those 4 bonds, I think they would then understand a lot about structure and conformation, and three-dimensional structure would become very simple to them. Not only for sp3 hybridization, for sp2 hybridization and sp hybridization. If they can picture in their minds where are these bonds, those 4 bonds, those 3 bonds, and those 2 bonds are actually oriented in space. If they can perceive that and conceptualize that in their minds very well, I think they would have understood structures out very, very, very well. So this is one thing that I think we should hammer down into it. And we can take models in the classroom and actually show them where are these 4 bonds actually in space. Next thing about hybridization. So next thing is about ionization. Very important concepts of pKa. The pKa concept, that is so important in whatever you are doing, whether in pharmaceutics or in pharmacology or in chemistry. This understanding about pKa, what does it actually mean? If you can drill this into them, I think it's a very important concept. So 2 concepts I have actually told you. Now think, okay, in your research, what do you think are the most important things that you wish you had understood very well and you have very grasped the most important concept? I definitely think that you can think of it and you can put down into a 32-page booklet. I can help you to do that. But these are 2 things, and think along all of these things line that if we can put these concepts, drill them into our students, I think they will love chemistry, because everything else in chemistry, the advances in chemistry, all those things that we teach them in chemistry actually boils down to this very simple ideas in actually chemistry. And then they'll begin to appreciate all that we teach them, and they'll be able to retain them very, very well. So Elvis, the ball is in your court. I'm going to ask you to write a 32-page booklet on the important fundamental concepts of chemistry, which will be useful for chemistry students, pharmaceutics students, pharmacology students, and analysis students out here. Okay, if you cannot fill up to 32 pages, maybe together we can actually make a very nice, brief 32-page booklet, chemistry for the pharmacist or chemistry for pharmacy students. This is all that you should know. So Elvis, I think you are online.
Yes. And
So
I take your point. Yes, definitely. So I was doing a mental calculations of to write this 32-page book, what you're saying, how many 32-page books I have to read and eliminate before I come to this final 32. So it comes to a big astronomical number.
Okay, so we'll write a 32-page booklet, chemistry for the pharmacist. Okay, and then we will publish it. And as we were talking about charging Sci-Hub, I think we will charge a fee. Otherwise, nobody will appreciate what we have done. So we'll charge a small fee, and I've already been saying that those who can pay, we charge them a higher sum, and those who cannot afford and others will charge a smaller sum. So we have a dual pricing policy for this 32-page booklet. Okay, Elvis?
Right.
charge
So you're going to
to
so you're
those
going
who
to
cannot
put
afford it,
exactly
charge
into
a princely sum to those who can afford it, and those who cannot afford will charge a very nominal rate. So we'll put what I was just talking to you about Sci-Hub, we'll put it into practice with this 32-page booklet. Okay.
yeah
And our first
exactly. We'll
gift would
set
be to Sakshi. Our first gift would be to Sakshi and to who else is
Pravaja.
there? Yeah, Praja. Okay, this booklet will be handed over to them. Okay, so thank you.
Feeling grateful.
Thank you, Professor Coutinho, for your inputs.
Yeah. So really, thank you a lot for responding to all the questions in a very elaborate and the best way possible. We know you have a busy schedule, but in spite of that, you joined us. We are really grateful, and I mean, we are really fortunate to have you here. And you not only made an effort to accept our invite and come here, but also lent us the rare facets of your learnings and experiences. So we'd also like to thank our faculty advisor, Professor Krishna Iyer, who has always supported and guided us and given us the freedom to organize events the way we all like, and also our faculty co-advisors, Dr. Elvis Martis and Dr. Sagar Patel, for helping us out in all the activities that we do on a continuous basis. Again, thanks a lot, Professor Mangal Nagarsenkar, Madam, Professor Mala Menon, and Professor Evans Coutinho for joining us today and making this National Science Day unforgettable for all of us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sakshi, and thank you,
you.
Pravija.
Thank you, Pravaja, and thank you, Sakshi.
Thank you.
We also
Sakshi.
enjoyed the
Thank you,
discussion,
Pravaja.
and I also enjoyed some more time with Dr. Menon and Dr. Coutinho after a long time.
Long time. And it
Thank
was
you,
a good,
Dr. Nagasekar and Dr. Mala. Nice meeting all of you all online.
But let us hope in near future we are able to
We meet
each other in
offline.
person and offline. Thank you. Thank you, students.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you so much.